Hi everyone, welcome back. We are continuing our reading of the one and only Ruby, and today we are starting on page 117, and it is called Introductions. Uncle Ivan smiled. "Ah," he said, "Jabori, the friend you saw today." I nodded. "Yep, funny thing is, I should have been terrified. Grandmama's warning about humans was blaring in my head, but Jabori made it impossible to be afraid. I can't explain it. Maybe it was because he smelled like an elephant. The scent of other calves was on his clothes, his hands, his shoes. Maybe it was the way he constantly sang or hummed or talked in that soft, low, wind in the trees voice. Maybe it was the way he knew what I needed before I knew what I needed. I've never met a human who understood elephants as well as Jabori, and I doubt I ever will. There's a word elephants have for those who take care of us. We call them sentinels. A sentinel is someone who looks out for you. It can be someone who's part of your herd, of course, but it could be anyone. Sentinels can be your caretakers or your friends or your teachers or your neighbors. They look out for you. They understand you. They help you. Sentinels make you feel safe. Jabori was my sentinel. My mama was a sentinel, of course, and my grandmama. My African herd was. Gachinga was, too. The two bulls who'd saved my life, the humans flying in the giant insect, and the others who had helped, although it took me a while to realize that. I looked at Uncle Ivan and Uncle Bob. My eyes were hot with tears. "You," I said, "you are my sentinels." I sniffled a little. I'm a very lucky elephant. Jabori knew I always needed a blanket draped over my back at night. The blankets were thick and heavy, and my favorite one had dots that reminded me of mud spatters and long stripes that reminded me of elephant paths. Jabori knew I would be hungry, right on schedule, every 3 hours. And there they are. Jabori just knew how to scratch an elephant ear. Jabori knew when I dreamed of awful things and thrashed and moaned that putting his arm around me and humming softly would help me find peace again. And Jabori knew that I needed a name, a new name for my new life. He called me Dooney, and before long, Naya was just a fading memory, like a morning star. I think maybe Jabori may have been part elephant. He started with food. Jabori understood what mattered to a baby elephant. Right away, he brought me something in a dented bucket. I heard a sloshing sound, like water in a puddle. I sniffed the bucket with my trunk and took a step backward. Talking and humming as he worked, Jabori dipped his fingers in the bucket. He waved his hand near my trunk, then put his fingertips to my mouth. Again and again, fingers in bucket, fingers to trunk, fingers to mouth. Whatever it was a little bit sweet and a little bit salty, and it made my mouth water and my trunk twitch. It wasn't my mama's milk, but I wasn't in a position to be picky. In minutes, I was gulping from that bucket. What a mess I made. Reth would have laughed at me, but I didn't care. It had been a long time since my tummy had been so happy. Bob smiles. "There is nothing," he says, "like a bite to eat when you're sure you'll never see food again." After 2 days of the messy bucket, Jabori brought me something new. It was shaped like a small, clear log, and I could see liquid sloshing inside. Jabori held the log upside down, and a couple drops plopped to the ground. I sniffed them and knew at once that it was the same almost mama's milk I'd been drinking from the bucket. Gently, Jabori held out the white log. I tested it with my trunk. It was smooth and cool. I touched the end. It was soft and movable, like hardening honey. I trusted Jabori, but this thing did not make any sense. Unless I thought of my mother, and all at once I understood. You figured out what that is? The bottle was much easier for me to drink from and far less messy. I felt Jabori's hand stroking my back as I ate hungrily. And when I was done, I burped so loudly that Jabori laughed until his eyes watered. So there she is, drinking out of a bottle. Although I didn't know it then, the place where Jabori cared for me was called an elephant orphanage. Jabori was one of many caretakers, all working together like bees in a hive. The orphanage was a special place for baby elephants who'd been found lost and alone. The way it worked was pretty simple. With pretend milk and pretend parents and a pretend life, they were trying to teach us how to survive. But the love was never pretend. Never. Mornings came really early at the orphanage, before the stars had run away. It was the stirring babies that woke me with their shuffling and tiny trumpets. Each one was in a wooden enclosure like mine, and each one had a human companion, all day and all night. In my space, there was an extra roommate. His name was Adongo, and he was a young African hedgehog. He He was round and spiky with bright, beady eyes and tiny feet. Odongo had been using my place as his home long before I'd gotten there, but he was happy enough to share the space with Jabori and me. He was a quiet roommate, but he liked to sit on my back the way Kachinga used to, and when I had bad dreams at night about Mama, he would cuddle up next to Jabori and me. Aside from Odongo, I hadn't yet met any of my other neighbors. As I calmed a bit, I grew more curious about the other elephants. Each day I heard a small group of babies head out into the open with their caretakers. Where did they go? And if I went too, would I find my family? The babies came back tired, smelling of dirt and sweet leaves. They seemed content, even happy. I wanted to know more. And soon enough, I had some answers when I was allowed to join the other babies on their daily adventures. The first time Jabori led me out of my cage to the common area, the babies welcomed me with nuzzles and trumpets and nudges, as if we'd known each other forever. There were 17 elephants at the orphanage while I was there. I was in an area called the nursery, along with 5 other babies. We were separated from the older calves. I never learned how the other babies had ended up at the orphanage. I wasn't there long enough to ask, and nobody talked about their pasts. Sometimes, though, at night, I'd hear one of the babies cry out, and I'd know I wasn't the only one having bad dreams. Mornings at the orphanage were busy. Before leaving, we all chowed down on our breakfast milk. The huge bottles arrived in a wheelbarrow, and sometimes one of us would try to sneak an early drink. Once we were fed, it was time to begin our walk. Because of the drought, the only mud puddle we could visit was shallow and just big enough for 3 babies at a time, but that didn't stop us from trying to squeeze the whole group in. Wallowing in mud was my favorite thing to do. Gooey and cool and messy, it was the best. We splashed and tumbled while our caretakers watched to be sure we didn't get carried away, which of course we did. There is nothing better in the whole wide world than being totally covered in mud. After some mud fun, we'd turn to foraging. Even though we were still just drinking milk, it was good practice for when we got older. It was hard work looking for leaves and grass and grabbing them with our trunk. It seemed so easy when the grown-ups did it. They had tusks, and they had lots of practice. One morning, I stuck my trunk into a scrubby bush, hoping to discover a tender leaf or two, when a strange white-winged creature hit me in the forehead. It didn't hurt. I didn't actually feel anything, to tell the truth, but it scared me with its frantic fluttering. I reared back and tripped on my own feet, landing on another baby who rolled onto 2 others. They panicked and dashed off as fast as their little legs could manage, and suddenly we were all running, baby elephants and caretakers alike. It was only when Jabori produced a deafening whistle that we stopped short. Fanica, the oldest baby, looked at me and said, "You realize that was just a moth, right?" "A moth?" I repeated, "but it was so big." The other babies began to giggle. "You're an elephant, Dooney," Fanica reminded me. "You're about a zillion times bigger than a moth." "Well, it bonked me on the head hard," I cried. "And I'm telling you, it was gigantic." But even I could hear how ridiculous I sounded. For a few days, the other babies called me Monster Moth, but they got over it eventually. That was the first time I learned how useful it is to be able to laugh at yourself. By evening, we were all exhausted, but before sleep, Jabori and I always had the same ritual. It involved the silly thing Jabori insisted on wearing on top of his head, a baseball cap. Of course, back then I didn't know it was called a baseball cap. I just knew it was fun to steal. It worked like this. Jabori would bend down and lean close for a hug, and I would wrap my trunk around his shoulders. Then, just as he pulled away, I would snatch his cap and toss it in the air toward Odongo. It was a pretty good flyer, like a round bird. Odongo would grab the cap when it landed, and sometimes even catch it, and then run to a corner and bury it in the hay. I sure loved that game. Jabori pretended to be annoyed, but I think he loved it too. One hazy hot morning, I had to stay behind in my cage at the nursery while the others went out for their daily walk. I'd stepped on an acacia thorn the day before, and my right foot was sore and swollen. Jabori fed me, tended to my foot, and kissed the top of my head. He said some words, then held up a finger, which I'd learned meant, "Wait here, I'll be back soon." I watched him go and made a pouty face. "Some of the keepers are sick, I hear," said Odongo, who was sniffing through the hay for any interesting food. "Jabori has to help out." "I'm stuck here all day," I complained. "But at least you and I can play." "Sorry, no can do," said Odongo. "I've got to search for breakfast. Some of us have to work for our food." I watched him slip through a hole in the wood. "See you soon," I called. I had no idea how wrong I was. All right, we will stop there. And I will catch you in our next reading of The One and Only Ruby.